So, this entire time between January 7th through January 20th through the 21st is chaotic, to say the least, here in the US. Americans are watching their nation go through T attacks in the aftermath of the terrible event. While I'm filming this in the midst of this unpeaceful and bumpy transition of power from US President number 45 to President-elect Biden and Vice President Harris, number 45 got impeached for the second time, and trials will continue for some weeks after the inauguration. And I'm calling it the President number 45 as opposed to his name because I do not want this video to be flagged, and I will be abbreviating some other things too, just because of guidelines of online things. Not only is the US facing large distress from the 2019 virus, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that name of the pandemic on this platform, where thousands of Americans are dying per day from this awful virus, but just have political turmoil on top of that. It is challenging, exhausting time in general. There's so many external factors pushing down collectively as a society on top of each other, on top of pre-existing external pressures involving racism or sexism, poverty, lack of inadequate health care, low funding schools, and accessibility for disabled people, LGBT plus rights, and other important societal issues. So how does it tie into the presidential transition from number 45 to President-elect Biden and VP Harris? Well, it ties into white privilege and how attacks carried out by people of a majority group, or in this case, white Caucasians. The events that occurred on the 7th of January were planned out on public platforms through social media for weeks. People used their personal social media accounts and deliberately planned this, and no action was done prior to interfere with the law enforcement or the FBI or CIA to prevent such event. Instead, law enforcement at the Capitol were outnumbered by the T group people, many of which were armed and blatantly holding memorabilia that are slurs or derogatory. Officer Eugene Goodman, a black Capitol police officer, had to distract the angry T mob from attacking senators and other people of the government alone, while said T people were chasing this officer, saying said racially driven slurs. Officer Goodman, very great officer. Officer Goodman eventually led such people to a team of backup police officers, and he did amazing. However, this whole T attack on the Capitol, the social media posts would have been reported on the social media platforms and reported to local agents or FBI units. However, this could have been avoided. The evidence was in plain sight for thousands to see, and there are going to be many who claim that it was a part of freedom of speech. There's a large difference between exercising free speech and using your quote-unquote free speech to incite violence and to disrupt the peace. Another T event that happened on Christmas 2020 occurred in Tennessee, in which officials were informed 1 year prior to the attacks of the planned event, and that this person was building suspicious materials. Instead, the spouse, when went to declare this, was brought to a psych ward. I'm not denying her mental illness state. However, instead of having the situation fully investigated, it was just pushed under the rug. These are just two events in recent U.S. history, mind you, 2 weeks apart, where evidence was found prior to the events and it wasn't taken seriously. However, in the same universe, a BIPOC, or a Black Indigenous person of color, can have their life threatened or taken away simply if one suspects that a BIPOC person appears suspicious. No evidence or proof is needed. BIPOC and other minorities in the U.S. really live in a different reality than the majority of the white people. A BIP person, other minorities in the U.S. have members of their community targeted at their places of worship, their workplaces, their neighborhoods, their schools, grocery stores, and even as far as their homes or any other place where they merely exist. Often when a BIPOC person, other minorities are targeted, it can be justified because there seems to be a threat. What kind of threats? People studying, working, raising a family, thriving, living, or merely existing. These are not threats. There's a huge difference between exercising the First Amendment and inciting or causing bodily harm, or hate speech, too. What does the First Amendment say? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or the press or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. Now let's have a look at what the UN sees as hate speech. There's not a definition for what an actual hate speech is, but it's universally understood. According to the UN, hate speech is understood as any kind of communication in speech, writing, or behavior that attacks or uses pejorative and discriminatory language with reference to a person or group on the basis of who they are, in other words, based on their religion, ethnicity, nationality, race, color, descent, gender, or other identifying factor, unquote. In the events that took place on the 7th, Confederate flags were flown, indigenous outfits were worn as costumes and mockery, anti-Semitic clothing were worn by many people. These offensive things would cross over from freedom of speech to hate speech because it attacks marginalized people based on ethnicity, race, skin color, and religion. I've been trying to put into words for the past week of what has occurred at the Capitol on the 7th. It wasn't a mere chance or accident, but a deliberate, planned attack. It was deliberately planned. And while number 45 encouraged this event to occur, there was an alarming amount of people who believe in these rhetorics. People do not miraculously develop hatred in their hearts in an instant. When discrimination is embedded through media, laws, unjust systems, and narrow perspectives through your education, your biases can develop. It is so frightening with all the evidence the people displayed online to plan the 7th that it did not appear suspicious enough for Facebook or Twitter friends to flag inappropriate content. After the 7th, many of those involved either stayed at local DC hotels or merely took a flight back home, browsing through the photos and videos they took when they were participating in heinous events. And the fact that so many say that last part scares me the most, that these normal people, or quote-unquote normal people, can return to their daily lives with no precautions, that these people with hate in their hearts can continue as normal functioning members of society. I do recognize that the U.S. government is actively trying to find all those involved in the events, and I hope they do, and they should. However, it feels like a reaction response rather than a proactive approach. I pray for all the marginalized people in BIPOC in the U.S. during this bumpy transitional period between the presidents. The last 4 years has been a challenging time to just be. I hope the next 4 years, justice, compassion, empathy, equality can start making strides. Much love, take care, peace, and have a good one. Voting number 45 has been the biggest accomplishment of 2020. That's all I have to say.